My life was supposed to be simple, predictable. I'd met Sarah when we were both in college. She was this whirlwind of laughter and passion, and I, ever the quieter, more reserved type, found myself falling for her energy. We got married young, right after graduation, and while the years weren't perfect, they were filled with the kind of rhythm that makes you think life's just unfolding as it should. I worked at the university in the IT department. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me the peace I needed. Sarah, on the other hand, worked from home, mostly juggling freelance writing gigs, taking care of our daughter, Emily, and keeping the house in order. The balance worked, for a while. That Christmas, I thought things were fine. Sure, we had our little squabbles. Who doesn't? But nothing that made me doubt the foundation of our family. I'd flown out for a work trip, but I felt reassured when Sarah told me she'd be spending the New Year's Eve with Emily, staying low-key at a friend's house. I even FaceTimed them that night while I was in Chicago, hearing the crackle of excitement in Sarah's voice, her usual cheer filling the screen. When I returned on January 4th, the house was spotless, unusually so. Sarah greeted me with her warm, but overly enthusiastic smile. I didn't think much of it at first, figuring she was just trying to make my return pleasant. But then, Emily, in a voice too casual for the conversation, dropped a bombshell. "Dad, why did Mom bring that man home after New Year's?" The words struck like lightning. My heart skipped. "What man?" I asked, trying to steady my breathing, my thoughts racing. Emily seemed confused, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. "The man from the party. He was here when we got back on January 2nd. Mom told me not to tell you." My throat went dry. What did she mean? A man? In my house? When I wasn't there? The blood drained from my face. I told Emily to go upstairs, trying to keep my voice calm, but inside I was shaking. I had to confront Sarah. There was no way around it. I found her in the kitchen, washing dishes, humming a tune as if everything was perfectly normal. But something about the air between us had changed, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. "Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to talk." She stopped what she was doing and turned to face me, her smile slipping ever so slightly. "Sure, what's up?" "Emily told me something strange." I started, not letting my anger show, even though it boiled in my veins. "She said there was a man here after New Year's, and that you told her not to tell me." Sarah's eyes widened for a split second, then quickly shifted into a defensive guard. "What are you talking about? Emily must have misunderstood." I didn't buy it. "You tell me, then. Why would she make something like that up?" For a long moment, there was silence. Sarah stood frozen, the plate she was holding slipping slightly from her grasp. It crashed into the sink with a loud clang, but neither of us flinched. She wiped her hands on a towel and, almost reluctantly, let out a long breath. "It was James." James. My mind reeled. James was an ex-boyfriend of hers from before we'd even met. She told me about him a few times over the years, casually, in passing. He had never mattered to me, but now, hearing his name out of her mouth filled me with a gnawing sense of dread. "What was he doing here?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's not what you think," Sarah said, her voice quieter now. "We ran into each other at the party. He was having a rough time, and he needed someone to talk to." "At my house?" I interrupted, my patience wearing thin. "While I'm away?" "It was just for a couple of hours," she explained quickly, almost pleading. "Emily and I got back, and he needed a ride. That's all." I stared at her, disbelief mounting. "And you told Emily not to tell me? If it was so innocent, why hide it?" She opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. Instead, she dropped her head, shoulders trembling as she began to cry softly. I could barely look at her. "I swear nothing happened," she whispered through her tears. "He was just here, and then he left. That's all." But I knew better. The words didn't fit. The pieces didn't add up. My stomach twisted with the suspicion I couldn't shake. I didn't want to believe it. Not right away. But the pieces were there, scattered, waiting for me to put them together. The nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach grew stronger with every word Sarah said, but I couldn't bring myself to confront her just yet. I needed more. Sarah, I said quietly, trying to maintain control. I don't think you're telling me everything. Her sobs subsided slightly, but her face remained buried in her hands. Please, I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. It wasn't like that. It was just a conversation. Nothing more. But I couldn't shake it. The word James echoed in my head like a hammer pounding against my skull. A man I had never felt threatened by, a man from Sarah's past. Was this really just a coincidence? I had to find out. I needed to know the full truth, and there was only one way to do that. Over the next few days, I watched Sarah closely, paying attention to every detail. I checked her phone when she left it unattended, her social media accounts, and even the little things, how she interacted with Emily. There were no clear signs of guilt, no obvious slip-ups. But I wasn't going to let her off that easily. The anger simmered, but I forced myself to stay calm, to think strategically. I started with the home's security system. We'd installed cameras when Emily was younger, just for peace of mind, but I'd never used them beyond monitoring the front and back doors. But now, I found myself obsessively scrolling through the footage from January 2nd. I was looking for something, anything, that would confirm my suspicions. Around 1 a.m., the video showed Emily's car pulling into the driveway. Sarah got out first, followed by a man I didn't recognize, James. The footage wasn't high definition, but it was enough to make my stomach churn. He had a bag with him, walking into the house like he belonged there. The camera caught them entering through the front door, then the footage cut out for a few hours. I didn't need to see more. The next step was the texts. I knew Sarah's phone was her lifeline, and while I hated the feeling of violating her privacy, I had to know. As I scrolled through her messages with James, a sick realization settled over me. They had been in constant contact long before New Year's. They talked about everything from trivial matters to deep conversations, shared jokes, and plans to meet up. The emotional intimacy was clear, more than just catching up. One message stood out. December 30th, 10:45 p.m. Sarah, it's been so nice seeing you again. I forgot how much I missed this. Asterisk James, me too. Tonight felt like old times. There it was. The confession, plain as day. This wasn't just a one-time encounter. This had been brewing for a while. I was boiling over with anger now, but I still needed more. I had to confront her with the evidence, but I couldn't do it halfway. I needed to bring everything to the surface. Later that evening, as Sarah sat in the living room watching TV, I slipped the footage from the cameras onto my laptop and brought it into the room, placing it on the coffee table in front of her. Her eyes flickered nervously to the screen, and I could see her face lose all color. Sarah, I said, my voice flat. Explain this. The footage played, showing James entering the house, walking inside like he belonged there. The silence between us felt suffocating, but I had no intention of backing down. She was trapped. She paused, her voice shaky. I didn't think you'd find out. I thought if I kept it quiet, it would be fine. Kept it quiet? I snapped, leaning forward. How long were you planning on keeping this a secret, Sarah? How many times have you lied to me? Tears filled her eyes, but I couldn't find it in me to comfort her. James is just a friend, Ryan. A friend I lost touch with. When we saw each other again, it felt like everything just fell back into place. I didn't expect this. This, I repeated, my voice rising. This is a betrayal. And you're telling me it was just a friend? You brought him into our house, into our lives, while I was away. What kind of person does that? Her sobs grew louder. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. You didn't mean to? I shot back. But you did. And now I'm stuck cleaning up the mess. Emily's been dragged into this too. You told her to keep it a secret. Do you know how much that breaks me? She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was cornered, and she knew it. I stood up, the weight of the moment crashing down on me. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if I can. You've crossed a line, Sarah. A line that can't be undone. I left the room, not waiting for her to respond. I needed space, time to think. But all I could think about was the lies. How deep did they go? Was there more she hadn't told me? How long had this been going on? That night I barely slept. I ran through every possibility in my mind, each one more painful than the last. But in the end, I knew what had to be done. The next morning, I contacted my brother, Daniel. If anyone could help me think clearly, it was him. We'd always had each other's backs, no matter what. When I told him everything, I could hear the disbelief in his voice. "Man, that's messed up," he said after a long pause. "What are you going to do about it?" I didn't have an answer right away. But I would. Soon. The next few days felt like a blur. I kept the facade of normalcy up in front of Sarah and Emily, though inside, my mind was in turmoil. I couldn't just sweep this under the rug. I wasn't the kind of man who ignored betrayal, and I sure as hell wasn't going to pretend like everything was fine. But I needed to be smart about this. I couldn't just confront Sarah without a plan. Daniel stayed by my side, offering support, though I could tell he was just as upset as I was. "You don't deserve this, man," he'd say, over and over again, but each time, the words felt like they were bouncing off me, not landing. I kept replaying the conversation I'd had with Sarah, her pleading voice echoing in my head. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she'd said. But that didn't matter. Nothing could undo the lies, the deceit. I wasn't going to allow it to tear me apart. The thing that struck me the most was how calm I had remained in the face of her betrayal. Most men in my situation would have exploded, made a scene. But I'd chosen a different path. I wasn't going to let her have the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. No, if anything, I was going to be methodical. I made my first move by pulling together all the evidence. I didn't just have the security footage, the text messages, and the hotel reservations. I now had a clearer picture of Sarah's relationship with James. This wasn't a one-off mistake, a brief lapse in judgment. No, this was an ongoing affair. And that was something I wasn't willing to forgive. That evening, after Emily went to bed, I sat down with Sarah in the living room. The air between us felt thick, oppressive. She knew what was coming, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of being the one to bring it up first. "Sarah," I started, my voice calm but firm. "I've been thinking. A lot. About what you did." Her shoulders tensed, but she said nothing, just stared at me, her face pale. "You think you can lie to me forever?" I continued. "That this would just stay between you, me, and James?" I let the weight of the question hang in the air, allowing her to feel the pressure. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted this to happen." I shook my head. "It doesn't matter what you wanted. The fact is, you betrayed me. You betrayed our family. And now I'm left to pick up the pieces." "I'm sorry," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I've made a huge mistake. I don't want to lose you, Ryan. I love you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I refused to show any weakness. "You can't just say sorry and expect everything to be okay. You don't get to destroy everything we've built and then beg for forgiveness when the consequences catch up with you." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. "And you don't get to make this about me anymore. This is about what you did. What we did. What Emily's going to feel." She recoiled, the reality of the situation finally hitting her. "I know," she whispered. "I know I messed up. I didn't mean for it to go this far, Ryan." I sat back, feeling an icy calm descend over me. "I think it's time we face the truth. And I'm not talking about what happened between you and James. I'm talking about what happens next. I'm filing for divorce, Sarah." She gasped, her face crumpling in shock. "No. No, please. Don't do this. You had your chance," I said coldly, standing up from the couch. And you blew it. You don't get to destroy my trust and expect me to just pretend like nothing happened. It's over. Her sobs filled the room, but I stood firm. This isn't just about you and me anymore. This is about Emily. You made choices that have consequences, and I won't let her grow up in a home built on lies and betrayal. I walked toward the door, ready to leave her in her grief. But before I left, I turned back. We'll talk about the custody arrangements soon. But just know this, you'll be lucky if I let you see her at all. The next few days were a haze of paperwork, phone calls with my lawyer, and sleepless nights. I had no illusions about what was coming. The divorce wouldn't be easy. There would be fights, anger, and resentment. But I wasn't going to back down. I would do whatever it took to protect Emily from the fallout of Sarah's actions. The morning I filed the paperwork was the morning I knew there was no going back. As I handed the forms over to my lawyer, a strange calm washed over me. I had made my choice. It wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. Sarah had to face the consequences of her actions, no matter how much it hurt. And I would make sure she did. The days following the filing were filled with an uncomfortable tension that hung over the house like a dark cloud. Sarah tried to reach out, repeatedly texting and calling, but I ignored her. I couldn't afford to get swept up in her pleas, her remorse. Not now. Not after everything. But it wasn't just Sarah I had to worry about. The hardest part of all this was seeing Emily's face each day, trying to explain something I wasn't ready to understand myself. She'd been oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. But now, with everything out in the open, I couldn't hide it from her any longer. One evening, as I tucked Emily into bed, she asked me the question that had been gnawing at her for days. "Daddy, why doesn't Mommy sleep in her room anymore?" I paused, my heart sinking. She didn't deserve this. No child should have to face the fallout of their parents' mistakes. But I couldn't lie to her. I couldn't protect her from the truth forever. "Mommy and we're having some problems, sweetie," I said, forcing the words out. "We've been having a tough time, and sometimes, grown-ups make mistakes. But no matter what happens, I love you, and I'll always be here for you." She looked up at me, her brow furrowed. "Will you and Mommy get back together?" The question hit me like a wave, but I knew the answer. "No, sweetheart. Mommy and I won't be together anymore. We're both going to need time to heal. But you'll always have both of us in your life. And that's never going to change." She nodded slowly, her small hands gripping my shirt. "I don't want you to be sad anymore, Daddy. I want us to be happy." Her innocence was a bitter reminder of everything I was losing. But it was also a stark reminder of everything I was fighting for. I couldn't allow this situation to break her. I wouldn't let it. After I left her room, I went downstairs, feeling like a weight had settled on my chest. The house felt emptier now. Sarah and I barely spoke anymore. The only conversations we had were about the logistics of the divorce, the custody arrangements, and how to manage the inevitable fallout. I had expected her to fight me on custody, to try and gain some leverage. But she didn't. She seemed resigned to the fact that she'd lost. And honestly, I wasn't sure whether to feel guilty or relieved. The truth was, I couldn't trust her anymore. Every time I thought about what she'd done, about the betrayal, it was as if I was looking at a stranger. A week passed. Sarah barely left the house, and I could feel the tension rising between us. Then one afternoon, I received a call that I wasn't prepared for. It was from my lawyer. "Ryan," she began, her voice serious. "We need to talk about the next steps. Sarah's lawyer is requesting joint custody, and they're planning to challenge the terms of the divorce. They're also planning to argue that your actions, particularly the way you exposed her affair, were malicious and damaging." My chest tightened. "What? That's ridiculous. I have the evidence, everything. They can't just sweep this under the rug." "I know," she said, her voice firm. "But we have to be prepared. Sarah's lawyer is pushing for shared custody, and they're going to use the emotional fallout from the affair against you." I felt a surge of frustration. So now they're going to blame me for everything? After what she did? I know this is hard, she said softly. But you need to be strategic. If it goes to court, things could get messy. We need to focus on what's best for Emily. Best for Emily. The words echoed in my head as I sat there, staring blankly at the floor. All of this pain, this chaos, was for her. And yet, here we were, fighting a battle that had been started by Sarah's choices. It wasn't fair. But I had no choice but to keep moving forward. The court date loomed closer, and I knew the real battle was just beginning. But I wasn't going to let Sarah's lies, her affair, or her manipulation control the narrative. I couldn't. I had to stay focused on what mattered, Emily's future. I spent the next few days preparing. I gathered all the evidence, the texts, the security footage, the hotel reservations. I even reached out to a few friends who had witnessed the fallout from Sarah's actions. Every detail mattered. Every moment of her betrayal was a piece of the puzzle that would ensure I could protect my daughter. And then, a few days before the hearing, I got another unexpected call. This time, it was from Daniel. "Hey man, I know this is rough, but I've been thinking," he began. "If you really want to make sure you're protecting Emily, you need to look at everything. You've got to think about how Sarah's going to spin this in court. You need to be one step ahead." I leaned back in my chair, exhausted. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about playing the game the right way," he said. "I know you don't want to hurt Sarah, but she's not going to show any mercy. She's going to do whatever she can to turn this around and make you look like the bad guy." I could feel my blood starting to boil. "So, what do you suggest?" "I know it's hard, but if you really want to protect Emily, you need to make sure the court sees Sarah for what she is. And that means documenting everything." I sat in silence, digesting his words. He was right. If I didn't want to lose, if I wanted to guarantee that Emily would be in the safest, most stable environment possible, I needed to expose the truth. The next morning, I met with my lawyer again. This time, I was more determined than ever. "We need to prepare for war," I said, my voice low and steady. "I want full custody. And I'm not backing down." Claire nodded, her expression grim but supportive. "We'll do everything we can, Ryan. We'll make sure the court knows what really happened." And so, the stage was set. The battle was no longer about Sarah and me, it was about Emily. It was about securing a future for her, one that was free from the lies and betrayal that had already shaken her world. It was time to fight back. The morning of the hearing arrived with a tension in the air that was nearly suffocating. I had prepared for this day, mentally and emotionally, but nothing could truly prepare me for the weight of what was about to happen. As much as I tried to focus on what was best for Emily, part of me still couldn't shake the anger, the disbelief that this was the path we had to walk. It wasn't supposed to be like this. We were supposed to be a family. But Sarah's betrayal had shattered that illusion. And now, we were on opposite sides, fighting for something much bigger than our own feelings. We were fighting for Emily's future. And I would not let Sarah's lies, her affair, and her manipulations rob my daughter of the stability she deserved. I sat in the waiting room, my stomach in knots. The sound of the door opening and closing echoed through the otherwise quiet space. My lawyer, Claire, sat beside me, reviewing the stack of papers in front of her. She seemed calm, but I knew she was just as invested in this case as I was. "Ryan," she said quietly, looking up at me, "we have a strong case. You've got the evidence, and we've documented everything. But you need to stay composed. Don't let them provoke you." I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about Emily. About how, in just a few short hours, her life would be changed forever. This wasn't just a divorce. This was the dismantling of everything she knew. "Remember, this is about her," Claire reminded me. "Stay focused on what's best for Emily. The court will respect that." I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself. "I'm ready," I said. "Let's get this over with." Inside the courtroom, everything felt cold. The sharp click of heels echoed on the floor as Sarah and her lawyer entered, and I felt a pang of resentment. She had the audacity to look at me with those pleading eyes, but I wasn't about to be swayed by her facade anymore. The judge, an older woman with a stern expression, called the court to order. We all stood, and I couldn't help but glance at Sarah, sitting across from me with her lawyer. She looked the same as always, put together, calm. But I knew what was underneath. I had the proof. She had lied to me, to Emily, to everyone. Mr. Williams, the judge began, addressing me. We are here today to discuss the custody arrangements of your daughter, Emily. It's clear that both parents want what is best for her. Let's begin by hearing from your attorney. Claire stood and began to speak with confidence, outlining our case. She mentioned the evidence, text footage, the hotel reservation, and made it clear that Sarah's actions had caused irreparable harm to our family. As she spoke, I glanced at Sarah. Her face was pale, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She wasn't speaking, but I could see the tension in her body. Sarah's lawyer, a slick, well-dressed man, stood up next, ready to counter our claims. We are requesting joint custody of Emily, he said smoothly, his voice full of confidence. Despite the allegations made against Mrs. Williams, she is a devoted mother who has been the primary caregiver for Emily. The petitioner is seeking full custody based on emotional claims, but there is no evidence that Mrs. Williams is unfit to be a parent. I clenched my jaw, holding back the urge to lash out. He was trying to paint her as the victim, to make it seem like I was the one who was overreacting. But I knew the truth. Claire was quick to respond, her tone sharp and unwavering. The evidence shows that Mrs. Williams has engaged in an affair, a betrayal that has deeply affected the stability of this family. She knowingly exposed her daughter to a situation that no child should ever have to face. Emotional harm cannot be understated in this case. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Sarah's lawyer tried to dismiss the evidence, but the judge was listening carefully, her eyes sharp as she weighed each argument. The tension in the room was palpable. Finally, the judge turned to me. Mr. Williams, is there anything you would like to add? I stood up, my legs feeling like lead beneath me. I took a deep breath and began, my voice steady but firm. Your Honor, I am not here to vilify my wife. I loved her, and I tried to build a life with her. But what she did to our family, what she did to our daughter, it's unforgivable. Emily deserves better than this. She deserves stability, love, and trust. And that's what I can give her. I paused, looking across the room at Sarah. I wasn't going to let her make me feel guilty. I'm not asking for revenge, I continued, my voice growing colder. I'm asking for what's best for Emily. And right now, that means being with me. The rest of the day dragged on as the courtroom battles continued. But every word from Sarah's lawyer felt like a punch to the gut. They tried to twist the truth, to make me out to be the one causing the emotional harm. But I held my ground. I had the evidence, and I wasn't going to back down. At the end of the hearing, the judge didn't make an immediate ruling. She wanted to consider everything before making her decision. As we left the courtroom, I could feel Sarah's eyes on me, filled with resentment, but also something else, regret maybe. She didn't say a word to me as we passed each other in the hallway. I went home that night exhausted. But there was a sense of relief in knowing that I had said everything I needed to. I had done everything I could to protect Emily. I sat on the couch, staring at the empty space where Sarah used to sit. Emily was in her room, asleep, blissfully unaware of the war that had been waged around her. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. I knew the ruling could go either way, but I refused to let fear control me. I kept telling myself the same thing. I would do whatever it took to keep my daughter safe. The ruling came a week later. I sat in the courtroom again, my heart pounding as the judge entered. The room fell silent. After reviewing all the evidence, the court finds that Mr. Williams has provided a more stable environment for Emily, and that the emotional harm caused by Mrs. Williams' actions has negatively impacted the child's well-being. I couldn't believe it. The words were slow to sink in, but as the judge continued, I realized what had just happened. Therefore, the court grants primary custody of Emily to Mr. Williams, with Mrs. Williams having supervised visitation. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the weight of what had just transpired. Sarah's face was a mask of devastation, her shoulders sagging as the reality of the decision hit her. I stood up, my eyes on the judge as she finished the proceedings, but all I could think about was Emily. I had done it. I had won. As I walked out of the courtroom, I could already picture what life would be like moving forward. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be better. For Emily. For both of us. The road ahead was still uncertain. But one thing was for sure, I was ready to start rebuilding. I would protect my daughter, and I would give her the future she deserved. And this time, I wouldn't let anyone tear that away from us. The days after the court ruling felt surreal. I had won custody, and Sarah had been granted supervised visitation. But in many ways, it didn't feel like a victory. It wasn't just about the legal decision, it was about everything that had led up to it, everything I had lost in the process. The family I had once known, the life I had once shared with Sarah, it was all gone, shattered in an instant. But as much as it hurt, there was something in the silence of my home that brought peace. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't easy, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had control. The weight of uncertainty had lifted, and though the scars of betrayal still lingered, they were no longer defining me. I focused on Emily. She was my priority now, and I would do whatever it took to make sure she felt safe, loved, and supported. Every day, I worked hard to make our new life as stable as possible. We spent evenings reading, watching movies, and going for walks. Simple things. But in those moments, I could see Emily's spirit healing, and that made everything worth it. It was about a month after the hearing when I got an unexpected message. I was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "Sarah, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I've been doing a lot of thinking. I'm trying to change. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm sorry. I will always love Emily, and I'll respect the court's decision. I'm not asking for anything, just wanted you to know." I stared at the message for a long time. My first instinct was to delete it. It had been weeks since the ruling, and I had moved on. Sarah had made her choices, and I had no room in my life for the person she had become. But I couldn't help it. I found myself typing a response, even though I wasn't sure why. I appreciate your message, but I'm not interested in rehashing everything. What matters now is Emily. That's it. You'll always be her mother, and I'm going to make sure she knows that you love her, no matter what. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. For a moment I sat there, my heart racing. I didn't expect her to respond, but a few minutes later my phone buzzed again. "Sarah, I understand. I just wanted you to know. I'll always be here for Emily, and I'll respect her boundaries. I hope, in time, you can find peace." I put my phone down and exhaled deeply. The message didn't make everything better. It didn't fix the past, or the betrayal, or the pain. But there was a part of me, buried deep down, that appreciated the honesty. Sarah was trying. And in some small way, that meant something. But for now, I couldn't afford to focus on her. I had a daughter to raise, and that would always come first. Days turned into weeks, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. Emily and I continued with our routines, school, dinner, and then our Friday night movie marathons. She seemed more at ease now, and every time she smiled, it was like the sun breaking through a cloudy sky. I knew there would be difficult conversations ahead, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were going to be okay. Then, one evening, as I was making dinner, Emily came into the kitchen with a piece of paper in her hand. Her face was serious, her brow furrowed. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something," she said, her voice small. I set the spoon down and turned to face her, instantly sensing the weight of her words. "What is it, sweetie?" She hesitated for a moment before holding out the paper. It was a drawing, a picture of our family. Or, at least, the family she remembered. Sarah was in it, alongside Emily and me. But there was a space between Sarah and me, one that was blank and open. "I don't know what to do with this," Emily said quietly. "I don't want to forget Mom. But it's hard, Dad. Everything's changed." My heart broke as I looked at her, trying to find the right words. "I know, Emily. I know it's hard. But you don't have to forget your mom. You just have to understand that things are different now. It's okay to miss her, and it's okay to feel confused." "I miss her," Emily said softly, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "But I don't know how to make everything okay again." I knelt down in front of her, taking her hands in mine. "You don't have to make it okay, sweetheart. Life is complicated. And sometimes, it's not about fixing things. It's about learning how to move forward." She nodded slowly, still unsure, but I could see the relief in her eyes. For the first time, I could tell she felt like she wasn't alone in this. "I'll always be here for you," I added, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No matter what happens, we'll get through this together." That night, after Emily had gone to bed, I sat in the living room, my mind racing. Sarah's attempt at reconciliation, while appreciated, still didn't change the past. I had to face the truth. I had to rebuild not just my life, but Emily's as well. There was no going back. The past would always be there, but it was up to us to decide how we moved forward. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were headed in the right direction. As the weeks went by, Sarah adhered to the court's decision. She visited Emily as scheduled, under the supervision of a family member, and though Emily was still hesitant at times, she seemed to be adjusting. I could see her finding her balance again, learning how to navigate the complicated feelings of love and loss. But even as things started to settle, the distance between Sarah and I remained. There were no more texts, no more calls. It was clear that our lives had diverged irreparably, and as painful as it was, I accepted it. We were both different people now, and no amount of apologies could change that. The most important thing was that Emily knew she was loved. And as long as I could give her that, unconditionally, without hesitation, everything else would fall into place. As the weeks went on, things began to feel more like normal, or at least, a new kind of normal. Emily and I found our rhythm: school mornings, family dinners, weekend activities. There were moments of lightness in the house, where the air didn't feel so thick with unspoken tension. But despite the routine, there was still an underlying ache. It wasn't just the absence of Sarah that lingered, it was the underlying unease that came with the transition. Emily was adjusting, but there were days when I could see her retreat into herself. She'd put on a brave face, and in public, she was the perfect picture of a kid who had adapted. But at home, when the doors closed and the world was just the two of us, I saw the cracks in her armor. One afternoon, as I was cleaning up the kitchen, Emily came to me with a question I wasn't expecting. "Dad, can I see Mom again?" I froze for a second, my hand still on the dish. "Of course, sweetie. You're allowed to see your mom, but remember there are rules. She's not living here anymore." Emily nodded slowly, her eyes searching mine. "I know. I just miss her." My heart broke in that moment. I had been so focused on keeping things together, on making sure she felt safe and loved, that I hadn't fully considered what it meant for her to have lost her family. "We'll work through this," I said softly, putting the dish down. "And if you ever feel confused or sad, you can always talk to me, okay?" "I know, Dad," she whispered. "It's just hard sometimes." As the months passed, the divorce became less of a raw wound, but it never truly healed. My interactions with Sarah were limited to the court-ordered exchanges, and each time, it was a reminder of what we'd lost. She'd show up, her eyes tired, her posture slouched, as if she were carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. But despite her regrets, I couldn't forget. I couldn't undo the betrayal, the broken trust. And while part of me wanted to hate her, to remain angry for the way she had destroyed everything, another part of me, perhaps the part still clinging to the love we had once shared, wondered if there could ever be a future for us, even if only as co-parents. One evening, after Sarah's visit with Emily, I found myself sitting in the living room, staring at the empty space where she once sat. Could I forgive her? Could I ever allow her back into my life in any way? I wasn't sure. But there was one thing I knew for certain. I had to protect Emily. No matter what. In the months following the divorce, I started focusing more on my career. I poured myself into work, diving into projects that I had pushed aside while dealing with the emotional turmoil of my personal life. The distraction was helpful, but it also made me realize how much of myself I had neglected during my marriage. I had lost sight of my own needs, my own goals. One night, after a long day at the office, I found myself sitting at the bar at the Green Lion, a local pub I'd frequented for years. It was one of those places that had become a sort of safe haven, a place where I could retreat from the world and just breathe. As I took a sip of my drink, I glanced up and saw a familiar face, Emily's teacher, Ms. Harper, sitting a few stools down. "Ryan?" she said with a surprised smile. "I didn't expect to see you here." I smiled back. I needed a break. Been a long day. She motioned to the seat next to her. "Well, I'm glad you're here. It's been a while, hasn't it?" It had. In fact, it had been years since I'd allowed myself to just be. There was always something: work, family, life. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could let go. We talked for hours that night, about life, the challenges of raising kids, how hard it was to navigate everything post-divorce. She listened intently, offering advice and sharing her own experiences. It felt good, in a way I hadn't expected. Maybe it was time to start living for myself again. As the spring rolled in, life had settled into a new rhythm. Emily and I had found our footing, and though the scars of the past were still there, they no longer defined us. Our days were filled with simple, ordinary joys: Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, Sunday afternoon bike rides, and cozy game nights. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I had learned something valuable over the course of this journey: how to move forward. How to heal and grow, even when everything you thought you knew was torn apart. And the person who helped me realize that the most was Emily. Her resilience, her ability to adapt, and the way she smiled through the hard days taught me more than I ever thought possible. One afternoon, as I sat at the kitchen table working, Emily came in with a piece of paper in her hand. Her face was serious, her brow furrowed. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something," she said quietly. I set my pen down and gave her my full attention. "What is it, sweetie?" She handed me the drawing. It was a picture of our family, Sarah included, just as Emily remembered us. Sarah was in the picture, but there was an open space between her and me, one that wasn't quite filled. "I don't know what to do with this," Emily said, looking up at me. "I miss her, but I don't know if I should." I could feel the weight of her words, the conflict in her heart. "It's okay to miss her, Emily," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "I miss things too, what we had before everything changed. But life doesn't always go the way we expect, and sometimes things can't go back to the way they were." Her eyes searched mine, and I could see the quiet confusion in them. "But will we be okay?" I smiled and pulled her close. "Yes, sweetheart. We will always be okay. And no matter what happens, you'll always have me." I wasn't sure if I believed those words fully. The past had shaped us, and some wounds would take longer to heal than others. But as I held Emily in my arms, I realized that, for the first time, I truly believed we could face whatever came next. The following months passed quietly. There were still difficult moments, times when Sarah's absence was painfully obvious, times when Emily would retreat into herself, but we kept moving forward. I didn't try to force the healing, I simply let it happen. It wasn't always linear, but it was progress. And then, one day, I received a message from Sarah. It was short, a simple text. "Sarah, I know it's been a while. I've been working on myself. I just wanted to say thank you for being there for Emily. I'll always be grateful for that." I stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to respond. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. But a small part of me recognized that this was the first time in a long while that she had acknowledged the truth of our situation. I didn't respond immediately. But a few days later, when I was tucking Emily into bed, she asked me about her mom again. Dad, do you think Mom's doing okay? I paused, the question weighing heavily on me. I wasn't sure if I had the right answer, but I knew one thing: Emily deserved honesty. I think your mom's trying to get better, sweetie. I think she's learning, just like we are. Emily smiled softly, nodding. I hope she's happy. I want her to be happy. I do too, I whispered, brushing her hair from her face. But remember, you don't have to worry about fixing anything. That's not your job. As I left her room that night, I felt a shift in the air, a sense of resolution. We had come so far, and while the road hadn't always been easy, I knew that we had found our way. Emily and I were strong, stronger than I had ever imagined. And though the past would always be a part of us, it no longer had the power to dictate our future. It was a quiet Sunday morning, just like any other. Emily was sprawled on the couch, flipping through a book, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee. As I watched her, I realized how far we had come. We were no longer two people who were broken by betrayal. We had rebuilt. We had healed. And as I looked ahead, I saw a future that wasn't defined by pain. It was a future full of possibility, of second chances, of new beginnings. Maybe life didn't always go as planned. But that didn't mean it couldn't be beautiful. If you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.